Hello. So for this month's Art in the Open, I'm doing a little bit of preparation. I'm going to go to Arthur's Seat, to St. Margaret's Loch, where there's a group of swans that congregate, and I'm going to do some studies of these birds. And I'm preparing some white cartridge paper with a wash of black watercolour paint. So this is going to give me a nice dark surface to work into. And also with this paint on the surface of the cartridge paper, a nice tooth is created which will pick up charcoal and chalk very effectively. So I'll be able to draw these white birds on a dark background nice and quickly using my materials, and I might even add a bit of colour. So I'll put those to dry. This piece is dry already, and I'll be able to work with charcoal lines, perhaps fill in dark areas, shadows, smudge them. I'll take some chalk as well, and that'll stand out well on the dark background. And I'll also bring along a box of pastels because there might be some other colours that I want to introduce. And my plan is to make some studies of the birds and also maybe something of the general scene. And then I'll see about putting a number of different birds from my studies together into some kind of composition, which I might even paint. So rather than sketch the whole scene, what I'm going to do first, or what I'm going to do while I'm here, is just draw some of the individual birds, which of course is a bit of a challenge because they're moving. So the way I'm going to do it is just cover the page with a whole series of swans, and I might start looking at one bird and then it'll move and I'll perhaps get the information from another one. But I would like to have them all in different directions so that I can put them together when I get back to the studio. I can put them together into some sort of composition where I maybe set them, I put them in the landscape. I'll have make some notes about the water and maybe even the Loch and so on. So I've drawn some lines. When the sun comes out, I look at them with my eyes half closed, and I might even do a little bit of shading. So this is willow charcoal, and my prepared paper. So as I described at the beginning, it's got a really nice tooth, so I don't have to press very hard with the charcoal. And I've got some chalk. And the way I'm going to use the chalk is the backs of these birds are really white, so I'll get plenty of chalk on there to get the lighter parts, but then it's a bit less light as we go down towards the water, so I'll just use a bit less chalk. And I'm not sure what happens with the heads actually. I think what I'm seeing is quite a lot of light at the top. So I have my different studies of the swans and a quick sketch I did of the Loch with some of the landscape. And now what I want to do is to put all of this together into some sort of composition. So I think I want it to be mainly the loch and the birds. So this little bit of landscape with the chapel on the hill that I made a note of, I'll just put that at the top. And then I'm going to have my water here. When I was doing the study, I noticed that it was quite busy with ripples and things at the bottom as the water got closer to me, and there was a bit smoother, a bit less textured in the distance. So I can do this simply by copying from my drawings some of the different birds, and working with the idea that the ones that are near will be bigger. So I'll put some big ones in the foreground, like this, and smaller ones in the background. And I can just simply experiment with transferring these studies onto a fresh bit of paper. So if I was to paint this, I would start, as I'm starting now, not with a painting, but actually with drawing materials, just really to get a feel for how they might work together. And it's always interesting if you do this with figures, or if you do it with birds, you'll find that actually once you start to build up a combination of small ones in the foreground and larger ones in the background, generally they start to relate to each other. They start to create a kind of a dynamism of swans occupying the same bit of water. I think the main principle is that you think in terms of bigger birds in the foreground and gradually getting smaller. And you might have to experiment with that. I was a bit unsure about that once I've stopped. I think by the time they get out here, they're tiny, and I might just have a few white flecks. But I think if you use something like charcoal, that's an easy enough process to experiment with, and if things aren't working, then you can take them off. But you might also find that just by connecting them with a texture for water, even possibly beginning to work with colour, you'll be able to be reassured by what you're doing that it's feasible, it's believable. So that's one possibility, but I have another idea. Rather than copying your studies, you could try this approach, which would be to cut out some of your birds. And I've prepared a slightly larger piece of paper, again with the watercolour, as I did at the beginning. And I can use this now as a surface to start to arrange some of these cut out swans to make a composition almost, yeah, using collage really. I'm gonna glue them down. But then the nice thing about this approach is that I can move them around. So I'm going to make sure that the smaller ones are in the background, and I can just by eye get a feel for what's a nice arrangement and also what's convincing. Do I need to move them up a little bit or down a bit in order to create that convincing sort of natural distribution, but also relative scale? So I can put in my setting. And even some of the texture of the water. And then move these dancers around the Swan Lake. And when I've got something that I like, I'll glue them down. And that would then be, for me, that would be a study that I could refer to if I was going to make a painting. If you don't really want to cut out your studies, then maybe you've done some fabulous swans or some fabulous drawings on location and you don't want to destroy them by cutting them out, you could photocopy them, photograph them and print them off, and then just cut up your photocopies or your prints, and then you keep both the original and have something to work with. But if you do cut them out, there's one more thing you can do. Hang on to the cutout, because you could use what's there as a kind of stencil. So for example, I've turned it round. I can use the cutout shape just to give me a rough idea of, oh, it's a shame I've obscured that head. That's quite a nice head that I would want to keep. But what I would do, it's not dry yet, so I can move it. I think it would be quite good to have, if you want to, produce a convincing natural arrangement of these birds, it certainly helps to have them overlap in places. So I think I would do something like that so that I can get this movement in different directions of similar swan poses going in different directions, but also having them overlap in the way that they would do, the way that they do when they're sharing the same space. And then I could develop that in the way that I'd started to, with connecting them to the water with some reflections or shadows, and freshening up some of that contrast. And as I did with my little study of the Loch, I also introduced a few colours to the water to connect them. So there's a number of possibilities, starting with some observation, some real life observation at the Loch side. Simple materials, just the charcoal and the chalk, a little bit of pastel, nothing too complicated, so that I can collect some information and then bring it to the studio and put it to work in, firstly, this is a kind of study to build up a composition of a whole, is it called a flock? A flock of swans, a group of swans. And I've tried different ways, copying my studies, big birds in the foreground, small birds in the background, and then I did some cutting out and some stenciling until I get an arrangement that I would like to spend longer on, or that I would like to develop, for example, into a painting. Okay, well, I hope you have a go and enjoy that. Cheerio.